I guess it all started when I started noticing the small things. Or maybe I should say, when I started noticing the lack of things. Dan and I had been married for almost 5 years, and at first, everything had felt effortless. We had met when I was still in college. He was charming, successful, everything I thought I wanted. He made me feel special, like I was the only person in the world who mattered. For the first couple of years, I thought we had it all. We'd talk for hours, laugh about the most mundane things, and make love like there was no tomorrow. It was that kind of relationship where you felt like your person was always just a little bit magical, always there, always ready to give you their full attention. But over time, things started to shift. It was subtle at first, and I convinced myself it was just a phase. Life happens. People get busy. Dan's work schedule became more demanding, and it was like I couldn't compete with his ambitions. He'd come home late, exhausted, or would cancel plans at the last minute. At first I understood. I didn't want to be the needy wife who complained all the time. I told myself, this is just what happens when you're building a career. But what I didn't realize was that while he was building his career, I was losing myself. And not in some big, dramatic way. It wasn't like one day I woke up and realized everything was wrong. It was more like the little pieces of me, the parts of my life that used to matter so much, just began to fade away. I became consumed by my role at home, making dinner, doing laundry, cleaning, taking care of everything he didn't have time for. And when he did come home, he was tired, distant. We would sit on the couch, barely talking, each of us lost in our own worlds. And then there was the silence that comes with not knowing how to break the monotony. I couldn't even remember the last time we had a real conversation. Not about anything that mattered. It was just logistics, small talk about the house, the bills, things that didn't make me feel seen anymore. I started wondering if he even noticed me, or if I was just a part of his routine. It felt like we were roommates, not a married couple. But the hardest part wasn't the silence or the distance. It was the loneliness. I didn't have anyone to talk to about it, because who would understand? My friends were all in their own relationships, and I didn't want to sound like I was complaining. Everyone told me marriage was hard. It's a phase. They'd say, you'll get through it. And maybe I could have, if only that were all it was. But I wasn't sure anymore. It was around this time that I met Ben. I didn't set out to meet him. I didn't want to meet him, to be honest. But he was new in town and worked at the same gym I went to. We started talking one day after a workout. Nothing flirtatious, just casual. He had an easy smile and a way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room. At first, I didn't think much of it. He was friendly, sure, but I was married, and I wasn't interested in anything outside of my marriage. Or so I thought. But Ben had a way of drawing me in. His compliments were kind, but never over the top. He seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say, not just the surface-level stuff. I started looking forward to our chats, which I told myself was harmless. After all, it wasn't like we were doing anything wrong, right? It was just friendly conversation. The turning point came one evening when Dan was out of town on one of his business trips. I was feeling particularly lonely, and I messaged Ben just to chat. That night, we ended up talking for hours. It was easy to talk to him. He made me laugh in a way I hadn't laughed in months, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was actually living instead of just existing. We talked about everything, life, work, what we wanted out of the future, and somewhere in the middle of the conversation, I felt something shift inside of me. Maybe it was the way he was looking at me through the screen, or maybe it was just how starved I had become for attention. But suddenly, I realized I wanted more than just words. I wanted to feel seen. I wanted to feel alive again. It wasn't long before our conversations turned more flirtatious. At first, I told myself it wasn't a big deal. It was just harmless flirting. It was nothing compared to what I had with Dan. But then, one night, Ben texted me something that stopped me in my tracks. I think about you more than I should. I could feel the heat rise in my chest. I had been thinking about him too. Maybe I had been thinking about him for longer than I realized. And that's when I knew. I knew I was starting to cross a line I couldn't easily walk back from. I didn't stop talking to him. I didn't tell Dan. Instead, I justified it by telling myself that I wasn't doing anything wrong. I wasn't cheating, not really. I wasn't in a relationship with Ben. But as the days went on, the tension between us grew, and I started questioning everything about my marriage. Was it enough to just exist with someone? Was it enough to just go through the motions, day after day? I wasn't sure anymore, and that's when Ben suggested we meet up, just once. He promised it would be casual, but I knew it wouldn't be. I was too far gone to stop. I told myself that I wasn't cheating on Dan, but in my heart, I knew I was already on a path I couldn't undo. The day I agreed to meet Ben in person, I felt a mixture of excitement and dread. There was no turning back now, not really. I had crossed a line in my mind, even if I hadn't physically crossed it yet. I kept telling myself it was just one meeting, just one time to see if the spark we shared online could translate into something real. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I was already tangled up in it. I was already in deeper than I had ever intended. I met Ben at a cafe on a Saturday afternoon. I had told Dan I was going to run errands, but I didn't feel guilty about it. Not yet. I felt like I was doing something for myself for the first time in forever. I had forgotten what it felt like to just be me, not someone's wife, not someone's housekeeper, but just a woman with her own desires. The moment Ben walked in, it was like my heart skipped a beat. He looked at me with those eyes that made me feel like I was the only woman in the room. We sat down, and it felt easy. Too easy. We talked about everything, from silly things to more serious topics. It felt like I could tell him things I hadn't been able to tell anyone in years. He didn't judge me. He didn't make me feel small for admitting how lonely I'd been, how disconnected I felt from my marriage. He just listened, and it made me want to listen to him more. At one point, he reached across the table and touched my hand. It was a simple gesture, but it sent a shockwave through me. I looked up at him, and I could see the longing in his eyes. I wanted to kiss him then, right there, but I didn't. I couldn't. I was still tethered to the life I had with Dan, even if that life had started to feel like a distant memory. But Ben didn't give up. He was persistent in a way that made me feel wanted. He told me that he hadn't been able to stop thinking about me. And when I didn't pull away, he kissed me. It was gentle at first, tentative, like he was testing the waters. But when I didn't pull away, the kiss deepened. It felt like I was floating, caught between guilt and desire. I knew what I was doing wasn't right, but in that moment, it didn't matter. I kissed him back. When we pulled away, we both sat there in silence for a moment. Neither of us knew what to say next. I couldn't tell if it was regret, or if it was the realization that I had just given in to something I'd been wanting for months. I wanted to run, to leave, to go back to my normal life. But that life didn't feel like mine anymore. Ben looked at me with a quiet intensity. "You don't have to do this if you don't want to," he said softly. "But I think you've wanted this for a long time." I didn't know how to answer him. He was right. I had wanted this. And maybe, just maybe, I had been looking for it in all the wrong places. But before I could respond, my phone buzzed in my bag. I froze. It was a text from Dan. "Hey, babe, I'm going to be home earlier today." I felt my heart drop. I hadn't expected him to come home this early, and I certainly hadn't expected him to text me while I was sitting across from another man, a man who wasn't my husband. I looked at Ben, my panic starting to rise. "I have to go," I said, standing up quickly. "Dan's on his way home. He doesn't know about you." Ben nodded, his expression unreadable. "I get it. Go. But you know where to find me." I didn't know how to respond. There was so much I wanted to say, but I couldn't. I wasn't ready to face the consequences yet. I grabbed my bag and left the cafe, my mind racing, my chest tight with anxiety. I got home just as Dan was pulling into the driveway. My hands were shaking as I walked inside, and I tried to look normal, to act like everything was fine. Dan greeted me at the door, and for a moment, I almost felt guilty for what I had just done. I had kissed another man, a man who wasn't my husband, but Dan didn't seem to notice anything was off. He smiled at me, kissed me on the cheek, and asked how my day had gone. "Good," I said, trying to sound natural. "Just busy with errands." Dan didn't seem to care about the specifics, and I felt a wave of relief, even though I knew this was a temporary peace. I wasn't really lying. I had been busy. but I was lying about what had really been happening. And in that moment, I realized how far I had already gone. How far I had let myself drift away from my marriage. That evening, we had dinner together, but I could barely taste the food. I wasn't really there. I was still replaying the kiss with Ben in my head, the feeling of being desired, of being seen in a way that I hadn't been in years. It was intoxicating. When Dan went to bed that night, I stayed in the living room, staring at my phone. I could feel the weight of what I had done pressing down on me. I didn't want to be this person. I didn't want to betray my husband. But I also didn't want to be stuck in a marriage where I felt invisible. I knew I couldn't keep living like this. Something had to change. I had to make a choice. The next few days felt like I was living in some kind of fog. I couldn't focus on anything. I couldn't focus on Dan, couldn't focus on the work I was doing around the house, couldn't even focus on Ben. My mind was consumed by the guilt of what had happened, and the overwhelming pull of desire for something more. I was torn between two worlds, and I didn't know how much longer I could keep juggling them. It was on a Thursday evening that everything came to a head. Dan had left for another business trip, and I was alone again. I was trying to go through the motions of my life, putting dinner together, checking messages, cleaning up. But my mind kept drifting back to Ben. I knew I shouldn't be thinking about him, but I couldn't stop. We had been texting a lot, and every time my phone buzzed, my heart would skip a beat. It was like I was living for those moments when I could talk to him, even if they were just brief, stolen exchanges. He made me feel like I was wanted. He made me feel alive. That afternoon, I invited him over. I told myself it would just be a quick visit, just a few minutes. I didn't expect it to turn into what it did. When Ben arrived, we didn't waste any time. We kissed almost immediately, as though we both knew the tension between us had been building for days. The kiss was hungry, urgent, and in that moment, I felt something in me snap. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was truly present. No more pretending, no more guilt, just raw, unfiltered desire. We didn't talk much. There was no need for words. We ended up in the bedroom quickly, and it was unlike anything I had ever experienced before. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional. The way he touched me, the way he looked at me, it felt like he saw me. He saw all of me, the parts of myself I had hidden away for so long. But just as things were intensifying, my phone buzzed again. I didn't recognize the number, and I didn't want to look, but something made me check it. It was a text from Dan. "Hey babe, I'm actually coming home earlier today. Should be there in about 30 minutes. My stomach dropped. The world stopped for a moment. I had been caught before, in lies and half-truths, in moments of weakness. But this felt different. This was the moment I had been dreading. This was the moment where everything I had been doing, everything I had tried to keep hidden, was about to be exposed. I froze. Ben looked at me, his face full of concern. He could see the panic in my eyes. I didn't even need to say anything. He knew. "Where's he at?" Ben asked, his voice low. "On his way home." I whispered, my heart racing. I had to think fast. I had to get him out of here. "I need you to hide," I said urgently, barely able to keep my voice steady. "Get in the closet. Now." Ben hesitated for a moment, his eyes wide. "Are you serious? Right now?" "Yes," I almost shouted, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on me. "Please, just get in there. I can't let him find you. Please." He stood up quickly, and nodding as he moved toward the closet. I didn't have time to think about what this meant. All I could think about was how to keep everything from falling apart in an instant. I rushed to straighten up the room, trying to act as normal as I could. I heard the sound of Dan's car pulling into the driveway, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. My pulse was racing, and I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I quickly grabbed a book off the coffee table to give myself something to do, something to act like I was occupied, like nothing was out of the ordinary. I barely had a moment to breathe before the door opened, and Dan walked in. His voice was cheerful, almost as if he hadn't just driven through traffic, dealing with work stress. He didn't even look at me immediately. "Hey babe, I'm back early. You won't believe the mess I had to deal with at the office today." I stood there, feeling like I was on the edge of some precipice, just waiting for the inevitable crash. I forced a smile and greeted him. "Hey, Welcome home. How was your day? He dropped his bag and headed toward the kitchen. I could hear him pulling open the fridge, grabbing a bottle of water. His back was to me, but my eyes kept flicking toward the closet, my chest tight with dread. I tried to act normal, but the weight of my own heartbeat was almost too much to bear. Dan started talking again, telling me about the issues at work, and all I could do was nod and smile. It felt like we were in two completely different worlds. He was talking about his day like everything was fine, and I was standing there listening, with a man hidden in my closet. I felt sick. My mind was spinning. What if he finds out? What if he opens the closet door? Time seemed to stretch on forever, each second dragging as I tried to keep it together. I couldn't let him suspect anything. But my mind kept drifting back to the closet. Ben was still in there. How long could I keep this up? Dan went to take a shower, and that's when I allowed myself to take a breath. I rushed to the closet, my heart pounding in my chest. Ben was still inside, his eyes wide as he watched me. "We don't have much time," I whispered, my voice shaky. "You need to go. Now." Ben didn't argue. He nodded and moved quietly, slipping out of the closet and heading for the back door. I followed him, trying to act casual, hoping that Dan wouldn't notice the sudden change in atmosphere. Before he left, Ben turned to me and said in a low voice, "I can't keep doing this if you don't make a choice." You know, I knew what he meant. I knew what he was asking. But I didn't have an answer. Not yet. Not when my world was spinning out of control. I watched Ben leave through the back door, the weight of his words hanging in the air between us. When Dan finally came out of the shower, I did my best to act like nothing had happened. But I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. He didn't notice anything unusual, of course. He never did. But deep inside, I knew I couldn't keep lying to him forever. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay when it was falling apart. The days after that night with the closet were a blur. My life felt like a tightrope walk, every step precarious, every movement calculated. Dan was back, and everything seemed normal on the surface, just the way I had wanted it. But nothing felt normal to me anymore. It was like I was living in two worlds, and I couldn't keep both going for much longer without breaking. I told myself I'd stop. I promised myself I'd pull back, that I wouldn't let things get worse. I had been with Ben only a few times after all, and each time the guilt gnawed at me, reminding me of how much I had to lose. Dan was still the man I had married, the man I had pledged to love. So why was I doing this? Why was I throwing away the life I had built with him? But then I'd remember the way Ben made me feel, how alive I felt when he was near me, how every word he spoke, every touch, made me feel like I was truly seen. I realized, in a moment of brutal honesty, that I hadn't felt that in years. Not with Dan, not with anyone. It was that internal struggle that kept pulling me back to Ben, even though I knew I was on the edge of destroying everything. The truth was, I couldn't stop thinking about him. It was like he had somehow taken root inside my mind, his presence consuming me. Every time I saw Dan, I felt this overwhelming sense of nothingness. I had been pretending for so long, convincing myself that my marriage was enough. But it wasn't. I wasn't enough. Not for Dan. Not for Meade. And so, the affair continued. I started to feel like I was losing my grip on reality, like everything I knew was slipping through my fingers. Ben and I would meet up whenever I could steal time away. Each time, the connection between us grew deeper, more intense. It wasn't just physical anymore. It was emotional. He was there for me in ways Dan hadn't been in a long time, and I clung to it like a lifeline, even though I knew it was dangerous. But then came the day when it all came crashing down. It was a Friday, and I had planned to meet Ben that evening. Dan was going out with his friends, and I was supposed to be catching up on some things at home. Ben was coming over, and I had convinced myself that everything would be fine. This was just another one of those stolen moments. A few hours to feel alive again, and then I could go back to pretending. But as I was getting ready, something inside of me shifted. I don't know why or how, but suddenly I realized that I couldn't keep going like this. The lies, the guilt, the feeling that I was becoming someone I didn't even recognize. I looked at myself in the mirror, and for the first time in weeks, I saw someone who was broken. Not in the way you'd think. Not physically, but emotionally. I was unraveling. I wasn't just betraying Dan anymore. I was betraying myself. I don't know what it was about that moment that made me snap. Maybe it was the realization that I had been pushing everyone away, that I had been lying to myself for so long, convincing myself I could keep living this double life. Or maybe it was just the sheer exhaustion of trying to hold everything together. I picked up my phone, and I called Ben. He answered on the second ring, his voice low and calm. "Hey," he said, sensing something was off. "Everything okay?" I said, my voice breaking. "It's not okay. I can't do this anymore. I can't keep lying. I can't keep doing this to Dan, to myself." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear Ben's breathing, and I could feel him processing what I was saying. I didn't know what he would say next, but in that moment, I felt like I was standing on the edge of something big, something that was going to change everything. "Are you sure about this?" Ben finally asked, his voice soft, almost tender. "Because I don't want to make it harder for you. I don't want to be the one who complicates things. I'm complicating things." I whispered, "I'm the one who can't figure out what I want. But I know one thing for sure. I can't keep pretending. I don't know what to do, but I can't keep going down this path. It's breaking me." Ben was quiet for a moment before he spoke again. "I respect that," he said. "And I'm here, you know. But I understand if you need to figure things out." I let out a breath I didn't even realize I had been holding. It felt like a weight was lifting off my shoulders. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was being honest. "Thank you," I said, feeling the tears threaten to spill over. "I need time. I need space. I need to figure out what I'm doing with my life." "I get it," Ben replied. "Take care of yourself." We ended the call, and I sat there in the silence of my home, surrounded by the mess of my own choices. I knew that I had made the right decision, but it didn't make it any easier. My heart was torn in so many directions, but deep down, I knew I had to face the consequences of my actions. When Dan came home later that evening, I couldn't even look him in the eyes. He was still so unaware of everything, so oblivious to the fact that I had just shattered the foundation of everything we had built. But I couldn't keep pretending anymore. I couldn't live in the lie. "Hey, babe," Dan said, walking into the living room, his usual smile on his face. "You okay?" I took a deep breath, and for the first time in months, I decided to be honest with him. "No," I said, my voice shaking. "I haven't been okay for a long time." Dan froze, his smile fading. "What do you mean?" "I've been lying," I said, the words coming out in a rush. "I've been hiding things from you. I've been having an affair." The room went completely still, and I felt like the world had come to a stop. Dan's face went pale, and I watched as the shock settled in. He didn't say anything for a long time, and when he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost hoarse. "How long?" he asked, his eyes searching mine. I didn't look away. "A few months." The silence between us felt suffocating. I had said the words I'd been holding in for so long, and now everything was laid bare. I didn't know where this would go. I didn't know if we could recover from this. But I knew one thing for sure: I couldn't keep living a lie. I had to face the truth, no matter how much it hurt. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm so sorry." Dan's eyes were filled with hurt, betrayal, and confusion. I didn't expect him to understand. I didn't expect him to forgive me. But I had made the choice to be honest, to face the consequences of my actions. And in that moment, I realized that no matter what happened next, I couldn't keep running away from the truth anymore. Not from him, and not from myself.